In this lesson of Apex classes, I want to start talking about syntax. We're going to spend the next several lessons going over different syntax, but let's start with the basics. First, we're going to create a class. And to do that within Visual Studio Code, if you type in, or if you hit Control-Shift-P, and with a Mac it may be Command-Shift-P. That one I'm not exactly sure. I'm using a Windows. Click on Create Class, and then you name the class. I'm going to name it Syntax Basics. And then, because we have a project, we can put it directly into the classes folder. And this is commonly where you're going to see it if you're working with other projects or you're looking onto GitHub and you're seeing someone who posts out their project and it's in this file structure. More than likely it'll look something similar to this. And now I'm actually going to remove this for now because we're not going to talk about that. But the basics for a class is you have your public class and then the name of the class. And then you have this set of brackets, and anything within this set of brackets is going to be what is within this class. So right now, this says public syntax basics. That is now a method that's within this syntax basics class. So anything within the class is associated to the class, and we'll start to talk about methods within this one. So we're actually going to delete this, and first what we're going to do is we will create a new method, and that new method is going to be public static void method 1, and then you put in the parentheses and then curly braces. And so what we have here is, in a different video I'll talk about the public, but public just means it's how you can access or who can access this this method within this case and this class within this case. And static, what static means is that has to do with when this method is compiled. So you can access a static method without having to create a class. We're gonna go through and talk about how you get to this method, because first you have to use this class and then you can point to this method, but you don't have to do anything else in order to get to this method. Static just means that it's compiled right away, as where there's other methods where they would be having to be compiled at runtime. So this static just means that, and I'll show what that means in a little bit as well to have better clarification, but it just means that you can call it right away without having to instantiate this class. And then void, and what void means is that there is nothing that's going to be returned within this method. What's going to happen is that you're going to call this method, and then you're just going to expect it to run without expecting anything to be returned back. We're going to go through some that have returns as well. And then this method 1, that's just the name of the method. The parentheses, the empty parentheses, means that you can call it without having any parameters within it. Actually, it doesn't take any parameters. If you try to put parameters in there, you're going to get an error. So then what we'll do is we'll just have it update an account. So first we can run it so that way we have an account. So first we need to query an account, and we'll query any random account, it doesn't matter. So we'll get the ID, the name from account, and then we'll limit it to 1. So instead of me doing a list, when I limit it to 1, I'll just be getting a single S object, and I can do it this way. And I don't have to get the first index either. It's just going to return one account. So then what I'll also do is I will take that account name and we're just going to modify it. We'll call it updated account name. Okay. And then we're just going to update the account. And that's it. So when we call this method from the Syntax Basics class, it's going to do a SOQL query, update the account name, and then update the account. Next, what we can do is we can create another one. And we will do, this time it will have a return, and it's not going to be void. So we can do public static, and then account. We'll do method 2. And then this is going to be pretty similar, so I'm just going to take this. So we're going to take the account, we're going to update it, but in this one, instead of just updating and not having anything returned, we're going to have a return and then account. So the ACCT. And the other thing that's different with this one is instead of this void, which indicates that there is no return, we have this account. And what this, again, Apex is strongly typed. So what this does is this says that it's going to return an account with this method. So if you call this method from a different class or anonymously through Apex Anonymous, you can put, when you call this, you can call it and put the account that gets returned into a variable. Or really you can do whatever you want or need to do with it. You can call this and have it immediately be put into a different method if you wanted to that has an account that needs it within the parameter. The next that we're going to do is we will talk about parameters. So I'm going to create, we'll copy this again, we'll kind of build everything off of one another. So we have this method 2. Right now, this would error if we tried to deploy this into Salesforce. So right now, this is just in our local environment within Visual Studio Code. And if we tried to deploy it right now, we would get an error. It would say that there's duplicate methods. We'll talk later on about having methods with the same name. There is ways to do that, but right now we're not going to do that. So with this one, I'm going to name it method 3. And we can see right here that we have the empty parameters. So right now it doesn't take anything in order to run it. We're going to change that. We want to add some parameters to it. So I'm going to take, I want to have an ID for an account ID, and then I want a string, and we'll call it account name. So what this means right here is that we are saying that we want in the first argument, so within these we're creating arguments within this method, the first one has to be an ID. And then within this method, if we want to use this ID, we can call it. As an example, if I change this from account to where ID is equal to, and this is, we want it to be an account ID, so then I can reference that directly. And then for string name, so this one is going to be the name of the account instead of it being the hard-coded updated account name. We can take in any string, because again this is a string, so we have to have it, so it will have to be a string. And then I can put it in for that name. The other thing that we may want to do is we may want to check and make sure that the ID is going to be is not going to be null. So again, I'm going to be checking that, bringing in the account ID, and say an if statement for if it's not null. And then if it's not null, I want to update the account. And in this one, we'll just leave it void instead. We could have it return an account as well. This one, I'll just have it be void. So that way we don't have to worry about, or don't have to have it return an account. Again, also with this one, with it saying that there's an account, we can still call it without, even though it's still going to be returning an account, we don't have to do anything with that. So we don't have to create a variable anywhere else if we didn't want to when we call it. And I'll go through that as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have non-static methods. So I'm going to create one public void method 4. Method 4. And we'll do the exact same that we do up here. So I'm going to grab this, put it into the method code block. And so what this is going to do, since this doesn't have a static, we are going to have to first instantiate this class and then be able to call this method. And when we deploy that and we start calling these different methods, I'll show you exactly what that means. Right now that may sound a little confusing, but it will clear up. So the next thing what we want to do is, this is going to be a void, so it's not going to return anything. We will change it so that way we do get one that is a return, or has a return. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take method 2, I'm going to remove the static and change this from method 2 to method 5. And this will be the exact same thing that we want it to be. The only difference is that it's not static. And then for the final method, we'll take method 3. And we will turn that to, from method 3 to method 6. We will remove that static. And then we will be good to go. This time what I'll do is I'll actually take out this account ID equals null. And we'll see if we can get an error with this. So I'm going to just save that. So this, right now I just saved that into local. And we still have to deploy this into our org. You may see right now a lot of the, if you're using Visual Studio Code, you may see all these kind of, they're not errors, they're warnings. It has to do with the CLI scanner that we had installed. We'll go over these later on as well, but it's just essentially stating that there's some potential things that we want to do beforehand within this code before we put it into Salesforce. But I'm just going to remove that. And so what I'm going to do next is we will deploy it into Salesforce. So one way to deploy it, you can use the CLI. I won't be going over the CLI command right now. Actually, I will go over that right now. But first what you can do is you can right click, and then if you already had this class within Salesforce, you can bring it into Visual Studio Code by this retrieve source from org. We're not going to do that because it's not there. And then there is a deploy this source to org. That's actually what we're going to be doing. Is it's going to be taking this class and deploying it into Salesforce so we can actually run against it. There's also what's really nice too is there's a diff file against the org. So if you made changes within the local copy and then you already had this class within Salesforce, you can use this diff file against the org, and it's going to show you the changes that were made within the local copy and within the Salesforce org. That's very helpful for if you're working in an org where you have multiple developers that are working on things in the same time, and especially if they're working within the same classes. So that way you can check the diff file and make sure that they didn't make any changes while you had it in your local copy, or vice versa as well. What we're going to do is we're going to deploy it. And then, so we just deployed it through, I do this most of the time is I just right click and deploy. We can also do it through the CLI. So to do it from the CLI, what we're going to do is we're going to type in from the terminal fsdx force source deploy, and there's colons in between force, source, and deploy. And then we're going to do -m, and that stands for metadata. And then we're going to name or type out the metadata of what it is. So it's Apex class is the metadata, and then the name of the class. So it is syntax basics, and then run. And we can see here that it ran successfully and it deployed the metadata. So now that we have all this within Salesforce, we can call it. So if we go back to, I'll just go to the test Apex, and then we can start calling these different methods. So I can do syntax basics, and then dot, we have the method 1. So this one, it was static, so that means that we can call it just as it is. And I can see that it ran everything correctly. And I have the SQL query that we did. I have the DML statement, and there is no errors, so everything ran through. And then if we can try the next one, so it'd be syntax basics method 2. And this one, it returned an account. So we can do account, and then ACCT is equal to the syntax basics. And then I'm going to debug the account so we can take a look at it. And then run. And when we run that, I can look and see on the debug, we have the account, we have the ID, and then the name of updated account name. So the next one for the third, if we wanted to run that one, we have the method 3. And then with that, we had 2 parameters. We had the account ID and the account name. So let's first go with the account name. And the account name, it had to be a string, so it could either be a direct string within this method, or it could be a variable that we input in as well. I'm just going to have it be the directly, so updated from method 3. And we have that string. And then the next is we have to have an account ID. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to first, we're going to run a query to get an account ID. I'm going to call it account ID, and then select ID from account limit 1. And so this right here would return a single account. And then if I wanted to directly get the account ID, I can, after this account, I can reference the ID, and this, I can reference it because I brought it in as well. an error if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to bring in the name. Because this SOQL query does not have the name right now, I would get an error. I'll actually show that real quickly just to demonstrate. So I can change it to a string. It's really not going to matter because it's not even going to get there. So I see right here, S-object row was retrieved via SOQL without querying the requested field account name. So in order to reference this field, we would have to bring it in from the query. We don't care about it though, so we're not going to bring it in. Okay, so now I have the account ID for the third method, and that one is a void. So I'm going to run it. And we can see here, we have two SOQL queries, one within the method, and then one just from this SOQL query to get the ID. We have a DML statement, everything ran through, I don't have any errors. And right here it says that there was a validation rule on the account, so we know that that fired as well. So then the next thing is, if you remember, we had a method for, and method for, it was a void. I can see here, method for, void. However, when I try to run it, it says non-static method cannot be referenced from a static context. Because this syntax basics was not instantiated yet, we cannot run this because it's not static. So if it was static, just like we see here, we can reference them, no problem. In order for us to reference the fourth method and fifth and sixth methods as well, we first will have to create the class or instantiate the class. So if I take the syntax basics, and then just like how we do it, how we declare and instantiate all other strings and objects, we do the same thing here. So I'm just going to call it, we'll do SB for short, and then new syntax basics, and now we have it ready to go. So now we can reference sb.method 4 through 6. And if you notice as well, when I can now see method 4 through 6. When I just had the basics, I could only see 1 through 3. So that's an indicator as well, showing that. And then it says void. If I go to, not clicking on it, it's not showing. It's not showing, so I can do it this way. If I do method 2, I can see that this one has a return of account. Okay. So now if I wanted to do method 4, I have to run with both of them. And now that runs correctly, and I can see a query and then a DML statement as well. So then I could change this to method 5. Method 5, we needed a return. So I'm just going to take this right here for the account. And then debug as well. And we can run all this. And I can see that I debugged it and showing the account, and that it ran correctly. So now we can do number 6, and we can take the same thing right here, copy it, and then I'm just going to change SB with the syntax basics, and then it's not method 3, it's method 6. And we can run. Oops. Sorry. Here we go. and that ran correctly. In the next set of lessons, we'll be going over different types of syntax, and we'll be using a lot of these that we've currently just gone through, and we'll be iterating off of this and kind of working through various other things. So you'll get a lot of practice on different ways and abilities for calling these, and when you would want to potentially use statics, or how to use static and how to use non-static methods.